On to you.
Open YouTube and see. You know.
Yeah, checking, sir.
Uh,
Link ತೋರಿಸೋದು ಸರ್ ನಿಮ್ಗೆ ಎಕ್ಸಿಟ್ ಬ್ಯಾಂಕ್
Hello. Vinod, I have muted. Once he comes, then only can unmute.
So should I connect the printer? Hello, sir.
Required, not required. Or Vinod, connect it. I think yesterday it was not printing.
Sir,
Hmm.
the system is not connected to the switch, sir. Straightly laptop. That's fine, no, sir.
No, no, don't put because the switch doesn't work properly.
Yeah, that's what I straightly connected.
Yeah. Check whether printer works because yesterday it didn't work. If it is not working, leave it.
Hello, sir.
Yes.
Printing is not happening. You have to restart it. Should I restart the laptop?
No, no, don't.
Okay.
Remove the printer. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, good morning. I'm just testing only.
Okay, sir. No problem.
The sir has come, sir.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning. Good morning. You sent it to sir?
Yes, yes. I sent to chairman. I'll call in another 10 minutes till
Yeah.
time is. Yeah. Sir, Dr. Reddy, I think he has.
He knows. You please call him.
I don't have his number, sir.
I'll just call him. Hey, good morning, sir. Happy Teachers' Day. Sir, you got the link and you can connect now by 11 o'clock. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. I just wanted to check, sir. Okay. Yeah, around 10:55, 11. By the time people join. That's it. Yes, yes. Thank you, sir. Hey, ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಬಾ.
Sir,
ಇಲ್ಲ ನೀವಿಲ್ಲ ಇವನ. ಹುಡುಗ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಬಾ.
Oh,
Good morning, sir.
good morning.
Sir, good morning.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning to
Professor Thorat.
Good morning to both the teachers, Professor Reddy and Sugata Thorat.
Professor Thorat, good morning.
Good morning, good morning, good morning.
Sir, we'll have to wait for another 5 minutes now, 10:55.
Why? There are three important people, speaker, chairman, and director. You can start.
No, the audience, there are many students of Professor Reddy. They called me and today especially they are joining.
Okay, yeah, teacher day.
Yeah, I'm just looking at including the Banamurthy base vice chancellor. He said without any, whatever the prior commitments, I have to attend the lecture. He's my teacher.
Thank you for the Teachers' Day linking. Yeah, I like it. Thank
No,
you.
especially I kept this date exclusively for you, sir, because
Oh, thank
you created so many students in university. But everybody is my friend, I know, and there are many.
you. That's a good thing. That's the only thing we have
Yes, sir.
in this profession.
Professor Reddy, sir, you have any PowerPoint
No.
presentation?
I don't have a PowerPoint, unfortunately. In fact, I have to start with an apology for that. See, the person who has been helping me, I can't do PowerPoints. The entire family was affected by this COVID.
Oh,
His father died, his mother died, and both wife and husband are now down with COVID recovering. It's a very sad situation, but anyway, I will not tell all that, but I apologize for not.
Hey, Gayatri, Professor Gayatri.
Happy Teachers' Day to everyone. Sir, Narasimha Reddy sir, namaskaram.
Thank you, thank you.
Happy Teachers' Day, sir. Very nice to see you, sir.
Nice seeing you. We have almost a big gap now, thanks to
Yes.
COVID. At least
Yes.
the webinar nights.
Yes, sir.
Thanks.
Yes.
Thanks a lot. How are you otherwise, Gayatri?
Yes, sir. I'm doing good, sir. We're working from home now, so
Yeah, that's good.
yes. So you are in Hyderabad itself, sir?
I'm
Yes.
in Hyderabad.
Hyderabad.
Yeah.
Yes.
And Hyderabad
Yeah.
it's not under our control. it's I
Yes.
think just now it's going up
Yes.
every day.
The lot of message mounting as Happy Teachers Day.
It's a very good topic that sir is speaking on today, like COVID, and I think you all have a lot to get up.
Good morning. Very happy Teachers' Day to everyone here. Professor Reddy.
Yeah. Happy
So much.
Teachers' Day to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very
for
much.
being there.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Thorat.
Thank
Wish
you
you very
very much.
happy
Same to
Teachers'
you.
Day, sir.
Sir,
to
good
see
morning,
you.
sir. Thorat, sir. Happy Teachers' Day.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning, Professor Madheshwaran. Happy Teachers' Day.
Good morning. Same to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning, Professor Sunil, Professor
Good
Gayatri.
morning. Good morning,
Good
Professor.
morning.
Can you hear me?
Happy Teachers' Day.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Wish you all the
Professor
same.
Kala, can you hear? Can you hear me?
Yeah. Of course, we can hear you.
Okay. Good morning. Good morning, sir. Thorat, sir. Good morning. Happy Teachers' Day.
Good morning.
Professor Madheswaran. Good morning. Happy Teachers' Day. Reddy, sir. Good morning. Happy Teachers' Day.
Thank you.
Professor Gayatri. Good morning.
Good morning, Dr.
Happy
Sunil.
Teachers' Day.
Thank you. Wish you the
Good to see
same.
you.
Yeah.
See, there's an interesting thing in this joining the meeting. The older first and the younger later. All the old people are here. All the teachers are here. We are waiting
Right.
for the
No
students.
Yeah.
See, Professor Kannan is there. Sir, good morning. Happy Teachers' Day.
Good morning, Dian. Good morning, Professor.
Good morning.
I got your
Good morning.
I got your mail. Your respect to Professor T.S. Professor Thorat pulled my leg. T.S. Papola.
You are also my teacher.
Good morning, Kanan.
Good morning, Professor Thorat. How are you?
Fine. How are you?
Okay. Very
Yeah.
nice to see Dian.
We could be a lot better, sir, but could be a lot worse also, given the circumstances.
Yes.
The only way is to laugh it off.
Yeah.
I think you're all there to laugh.
I'll take only 2 minutes to start
Okay.
because I had to get a signal from my controller, system analyst, Mr. Kamat.
इसमें गाने इसी पे आते हैं अमेज़न प्राइम पे क्यों वो तो हुआ था क्या जो होता है एफएम
There was 360 people registered, but anyhow, eventually in between they joined. So now 50 joined. Not 350, 390 people registered. Yesterday I've seen.
Good morning, Dr. Ravindra.
Good morning, Kada. How are you?
I'm okay, sir. How are you? Happy Teachers' Day.
Fine. Thank you.
Good to see you, sir.
Good morning, sir. How are you?
Good morning, sir.
Fine, Ready? How are you?
Fine, sir.
All well?
Fine, doing well.
Good morning, Dr. Ravindra.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm fine.
Okay.
Good morning, Ravindra, sir.
Good morning, Navtiyal. How are you, Sunil?
Good, sir. Thank you. Good morning, Kanan, sir. Good to see you.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning. Professor Kannan.
Yes. Thank you.
So Dr. Ravindra, I see, is very active, writing articles in Deccan Herald and also a lot of webinars. The power of positive
Yeah,
thinking.
somehow.
Yes, I think that's wonderful, because otherwise we will become mortified.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is correct. You know, even to keep healthy, one has to be active.
That's right.
Professor Madheshwaran, you're mute.
Who, me?
No, Professor Madheshwaran is saying something. He's muted. Okay, now.
Okay. Good morning, Dr. Ravindra.
Good morning, Dr. Madesh. How are you? And nice that you are holding so many webinars.
Thank you,
And,
sir.
time when people
No,
can't.
sir, as usual, institute is running with all the meetings, including APC, biannual seminar, RPC, bylaw
Yeah, yeah.
committee, everything going on.
But
The-
are the faculty coming regularly to the institute or they work from
No,
home?
the people whom they are residing inside, there are 12 faculties there.
Yeah, those who are within the
Yeah,
campus.
there are
Yeah.
some 40 non-teaching staff residing. Everybody is attending.
Okay, good,
Sir,
good.
we are also going to office, sir. Yesterday I was in the office since morning.
You were
till
in the
late.
office yesterday? Okay.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
once in a
some of
week,
the people
once
from
a week I
outside,
go
they
to
come
office.
with their own car and
Because we have, yeah. And Dr. Madheswaran is encouraging also to visit if we can, to come to office. So we go to office.
I've not visited Isaac for the past several months, but I'm always working on Isaac things. So I'm always thinking Isaac. I'm always working Isaac.
Sir, with the permission of the chair, shall we start, sir?
Yeah, let us start.
Yes, sir.
Yes, I think you can start.
Yeah. Good morning, everybody. And today is the great occasion that all of us have to remember this day on September 5th. The India celebrates Teachers' Day. This day is dedicated to the country's first Vice President, Dr. Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan, and Guru Shishya Parampara.
Madheshwaran, your voice is low.
Is it?
Yeah,
No,
please.
for everybody is
Okay.
here.
We are able to. We are
It is
able to
okay.
hear.
We are able to hear.
Yeah, maybe my problem. Okay, please
He
go
has
ahead.
to increase his audio.
Maybe my problem. Yeah.
Yeah, just I'll wait for a minute when you fix up your microphone. Yeah. Is that okay, sir?
Very clear, because I put on.
Thank you very much.
I put on this infrastructure.
Yeah. Once again, I start because today I'm very happy that many of my mentors and teachers and the philosophers are in this online. And on September 5th, India celebrates Teachers' Day. The day is dedicated to the country's first Vice President, Dr. Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan. And of course, Guru Shishya Parampara has been an important part of our Indian culture. Therefore, there is nothing better than celebrating this day to thank our teachers for all their important lessons and inspiring us to become better individuals in the world. And today we are lucky enough to have a great and a highly inspired and popular teacher, Professor Nasim Reddy. And of course, he has produced so many students, and whom I know very well. There are many students are my friends. And I kept his lecture. I kept his lecture especially.
You're muted again. You're muted again.
You are
Okay. It's okay. My controller must have been muted because the other is making sound. When he is muting them, he has muted me also. Yeah. Say today, very specifically, I kept this lecture, and none other than Professor D.N. Reddy is one of the popular teacher of University of Hyderabad, and he has produced so many students, and they are all placed well. And I have received, sir, there are about 42 mails on behalf of you. that they are greeting you. Probably all 42 mails I'll forward to you. I eventually all your students also may join. And of course, I consider myself also a student because you know me right from my student days in the platform of Indian Society for Labor Economics. And you are all taught us and inspired us. And today, Professor Reddy is going to talk about economic crisis before and after COVID-19 and the response of Government of India. And all of us know that the reason COVID-19 pandemic has not only resulted in the loss of human lives, but also distressed the economies. And the impact of the crisis is even higher in emerging economies like India due to already slowing growth rate, poor health infrastructure, and a significant population living in the extreme poverty. While the government is taking measures to handle the crisis, nobody can be sure if these measures are adequate, as this will depend on how soon the spread of the virus is contained in the country. So given this situation, however, understanding the depth of impact of COVID-19 pandemic on the Indian economy is vital to formulate the policy and measures to contain this economic impact. And here is Professor D.N. Reddy has chosen the apt title, The Economic Crisis Before and After COVID-19 and the Response of Government of India. Given this opportunity that I would like to, of course, Professor Nasim Reddy may not need introduction to the Indian research scholars. However, it is my duty. There are some young students whom they are on the line. They should understand. And of course, Professor Nasim Reddy's CV is so long and he has achieved in almost all the fields. But nevertheless, I would like to say very briefly about his biodata. Dr. Nasim Reddy was formerly Professor of Economics at the University of Hyderabad and late Sangaran Chair Professor, National Institute of Rural Development, Hyderabad. Presently, he is a honorary visiting professor of Institute for Human Development, New Delhi. His area of specialization include labor economics, agrarian studies, and political economy of development. He supervised large number of students of their MPhil and PhD thesis. There is, there is a huge number. I can't count. Only Professor Nasim Reddy can say that how many students he has created. His publication, basically, that is very important for many learned audience sitting here. Some of the books are very, very interesting book. His publication include Towards Understanding WTO Doha Development Round and other publication which I remember, Labor Regulation, Industrial Growth and Employment, a study of recent trends in Andhra Pradesh. And one of the widely cited book is Agrarian Crisis in India. And the next book is Political Economy of Microfinance and Marginalized Groups. That is basically in Barbara Harris and Judith Hayer's edited book. And also another interesting book, he has written Indian Capitalism in Development. And very recently, there are two books which I would like to quote for the benefit of the audience. The Rural Labor Mobility in Times of Structural Transformation, Dynamics and Perspectives from Asian Economics. And also, I'm very privileged to have my own paper, and he has motivated me that Madheswaran, you have been working on inequality, but he has motivated me and inspired me, and myself and my colleague Vani's paper is in his volume. Recently, he brought India's Social Development Report 2018, Rising Inequalities in India. It's an Oxford University Press. It's a very recent one, 2019. Of course, he inspired me to write an inequality of opportunities. In fact, we put a lot of effort and he has given a lot of suggestions when we are working. So thank you very much for your inspiration, generally to all the students and also particularly to me. And I request our chairperson, Professor Thorat, to give the few initial remark, and then it can be handed over to Professor Reddy.
Thank you, Dr. Madheshwaran. I'm audible?
Yes, yes, you are audible.
Yeah. Thank you, Madheshwaran. Good morning to all. And let me begin with thanks to Narasimha Reddy for agreeing to speak to us on a very important topic. And well, I did not mention anything about him. Dr. Madheshwaran has given in detail. I only thank him that for sparing the time, and we look forward to listen to him. I think over to Narasimha Reddy now.
Thank you. I think first, let me thank the chairperson, Professor Thorat, and the director, Madheshwaran, for providing me a window to share my understanding of the crisis in the Indian economy. I must start with an apology for not being able to set my lecture in the form of a PowerPoint presentation because the person who was helping me in some kind of health distress is affected by COVID and his entire family. I myself can't make PowerPoints. Let me explain the choice of the title of my lecture. I have consciously chosen this title with an emphasis on crisis before and after, just as a caution against the danger of an impression that is sought to be created that the crisis is entirely because of the pandemic, and it could be easy to blame it as the act of God. I'm cautioning it's not an act of God, and much has to be done in this case by the action of those who govern us. I'm aware that the time is short to put before you all that I intend to say. Therefore, let me set this lecture in a framework I hold, and then run through before and after. My basic proposition is that there has been a certain basic policy shift. You can call this as the neoliberal shift since the last 3 decades in the Indian economy, which has brought about certain structural and institutional changes. I mean, popularly, this is referred to LPG, that are at the root of the nature of growth, the production and distributional outcomes. Any palliative or half-hearted policy responses against the adverse consequences of the neoliberal regime are not likely to stem their unsustainable consequences. Worse still, if the policy interventions are in the nature of populist or the ones that are in the nature of furthering neoliberal reforms, the disruptions will be not only on growth, but also to its sustainability. And the economic consequences are also likely to be devastating. Within this broad framework, I would like to address the crisis before and after, referring to that of the COVID. I will discuss briefly the crisis before in 2 parts. First, briefly, I would refer to that of the beginning of the neoliberal regime and perhaps what has transpired in terms of employment, income generation, and distribution, briefly. And then the second part, that's again before, is the one that refers to the time of the present regime, ruling regime, from 1415 down to the last quarter, or even could go to, last quarter of 1920. And then I would turn to that of the immediate context. That is, I think, the day when the regime recognized this as the danger and imposed what could be called as a draconian kind of a lockdown for almost 60 days. So let me begin with that briefly. I mean, this is, most of these things, when it comes to the question of detail, are familiar to you. I'm pulling them together to see some kind of a meaning in what perhaps I am to put across. I think the basic emphasis is that if you do not keep this regime into a conscious analytical framework, there are likely to be several things missed. And it also helps people who would like to blame something else, including that of God. I mean, let me turn to that of the period late, including, let's say, normally refer to that of a pre-1991. There's several liberal kind of, let's say, changes within the economy. So some people do talk in terms of early 80s onwards, the beginning of the neoliberal regime. But of course, the more concrete shape it takes 1991. And then when it comes to the question of growth during this period, I would go up to that of 17, 18, or where I think I would pick up the next crisis, 16, 17, that would be the second part. And then when we look at the growth performance per se, in fact, one of the basic thrusts of the neoliberal regime, this is the point I'm trying to emphasize when I refer to that of the importance of neoliberalism. It is not a simple policy. It's, I think, the one that has changed the very anatomy and physiology of the economy. This is what, no, it has come in the name of what is called as structural adjustment program. What is this? See, many times one gets confused, but essentially the focus is on institutional structures that perhaps evolved right from the planning in India, which have been devastatingly turned into different ones. This is what, in simplification, it's a structural shift from an economy which is essentially state-driven, state-dominating the economy and driven, to that of increasingly market-driven. And then with this comes several things that could be referred to part of the structures. I mean, if you turn to that, for instance, employment, this is the one which unleashes or destroys the expectations that a planned development, increasingly towards that of organized development, would lead to that of improvement in the employment structure, where there would be increasingly secure, more safe, and let's say with social security, etc., employment. But when we turn to that of this shift structurally to that of from state to that of market, one of the major changes that we find is that, of course, already Indian economy was dominated by informal kind of employment, but instead of taking a turn increasingly towards that of formalized, secure employment and its security, and of course, several provisions, including that of health education, as a part of this process, it turns completely the other way. I mean, in fact, what becomes dominant, although it's not this measure that brought about informality, but the expectations of informality yielding place to that of more formal, secure, has been shattered. And therefore, you find that even in the organized sector, which was believed to be the one that provides safe, secure kind of employment, turns into that of, let's say, informalizing. And this is the basic transformation that you find, let's say, shift in structures from the state to that of, let's say, market. And along with that, the kind of, let's say, everything is in terms of decontrol, deregulation, and then, of course, non-intervention. And with a market trying to not only dominate the economy, but even capture what little that could be called as regulation. This is I think, corporate capture of little regulation. And the result is that when it comes to the question of the nature, the quality of, let's say, the employment, that you would find that the belief that employment would lead to that of a better income and therefore coming out of, let's say, poverty completely changes. And you would find that working poor becomes one of the major part of, let's say, the poor. And then I think it's now, I think you can go on, this is very well known. And then when it comes to the question of, let's say, the poor, 90% of those who are poor are still working. Therefore, employment doesn't seem to mean as the one that liberates you from poverty, but keeps you at low quality, low paid, insecure kind of employment. This is the one that leads to that of the way in which things move during the, let's say, this regime of what we refer to the neoliberalism. And in fact, one of the ways is that all the time we spend talking in terms of lack of data and trying to look at what has been happening to that of income distribution. But thanks to some improvements in the methodology and a bold efforts made, that we have now a reasonably understandable the kind of, let's say, process of distribution of income generated through that of growth during this period. Of course, when it comes to the question of this neoliberal regime from 1991 specifically to that of, let's say, 16, 17, the average annual growth was about 7%, which substantially is higher. It's almost double that of what we used to call before 1980, India was stuck in what's called as Hindu rate of growth of 3.5%. Of course, there was a growth. But I think what was the consequence of this growth? What type of growth? You have very high levels of growth. And then, of course, this is also the period. It's not only informalization, but as the growth moves to that of 2005 onwards, you would also find that the growth is also leading to that of jobless growth. And then, and the quality of, let's say, jobs itself is, as we have seen, is very poor. And then the result is reflected in the income distribution. For instance, if you refer to that, this is, I would take the basis of the work done by Paul, Chancellor and Piketty. They have a beautiful paper using data in various ways. No, although you don't have household income surveys, but they go to that of income tax data, your so-called expenditure, household expenditure data, and also small other surveys like that of India Human Development Surveys, and then put together. In fact, they have constructed income distribution data from 1922. As all of us know, 1922 becomes a landmark in one sense, because it's the year when India introduced income tax. And in fact, the idea is the Piketty who picked up Kuznets' idea of looking at income distribution. Kuznets was the first person to look at income tax data of the United States to construct distribution of income. That idea he picks up, and then of course is now very popularly, along with other things, constructed. And this paper, I think, Chancellor and Piketty's paper, which is referred to as income distribution in India, from British Raj to that of billionaires Raj. It analyzes, interestingly, several dimensions. I give a simple picture here that if you take into consideration the two parts that say pre-neoliberal regime period, which was referring to as a period dominated by public sector and state in the economy, 1951 to 1980, and then the other period, you take it from 80 to that of their data up to 2014, and look at, let's say, what happened to the distribution of income generated. This shows the top 10% of income earners in 51-80 had a share in the income generated, which was equivalent to 24%. But when you turn to that of, let's say, 80, 2014, it increases to 66% from 24%. The middle 40%, they're not necessarily middle class. There are several people, low income, also in that group. This next 40% had share in income generated between 51 and 80 to the extent of 49%. But it steeply falls to that of 23% in the period of our regime, neoliberal regime, 1980 to that of 2014. And the bottom 50% had a share of 28% in 51, 1980, comes down to that of 11% by 1814. And this is the one which prompts us to see that already there are clear indications. The economy is already in strain. And therefore, what we see is, let's say, informalization, working poor, poor quality of, let's say, the incomes, all that is a part and parcel of this process in a context where there is a very high, consistent, high growth rates. And then what was the response of the government then? In fact, it was known by that time. So the voices were expressed and things were happening, although there was no clear data to show the way in which we can show now the extent of shift in income distribution in favor of the top 10%. There was voices, and therefore one of the early measures is that they wanted to stem it. These were some kind of off-part without touching the reform agenda. In fact, the demand during that period was more reforms. Where is the second generation reforms? But there was some kind of a constraint, and therefore the seeing consequences of the deteriorating situation of the labor and incomes of labor, then there were some attempts to bring in, I think this is partly a contribution of what there was, some kind of a National Advisory Council, but a most effective initiative in the previous regime, UPA regime, was the understanding of the coming crisis, and let's say the constitution of what I would consider as a landmark commission, the National Commission on Enterprises in an Organized Sector. I mean, this is a landmark because when it comes to the question of the situation, how to stem it, how to reduce the kind of a crisis that is developing in terms of informalization, and then of course, decreasing quality of employment and incomes. I mean, then the growing insecurity. And therefore, when it comes to the Commission's reports 2006-7, they play a very critical role in this direction in trying to suggest the need for security of not only employment. The major suggestion was the national minimum social security floor for the country as a whole. The estimates suggest it was a manageable kind of thing. They were, of course, going with that of, let's say, robust confidence. The extent of commitment involved was relatively smaller. Even if you take 300 million people who require some kind of it could later be universal, but certain minimum kind of a social security for all workers. And this is, I think, the one which raised hopes, but I think the regimes then, I think the person who was in charge of the finance ministry is going about writing syndicated columns of all kinds, and then he was the one major resistant. And therefore it became only some kind of a diluted thing when it got transformed into unorganized sector workers social security act. And then they put together some poverty alleviation programs of the state and then call it, let's say, social security for the unorganized sector workers. And similar, of course, the measures. Mainly it's all the policy responses were, of course, trying to understand the crisis coming in, understand the demand failure that is likely to affect growth. And therefore, you also find that when it comes to the question of rural kind of a distress situation, the national, what then later called as, let's say, Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act in 2006. It's also some measure. And then, of course, there was also, before that, addressing informal workers, the National Building and Other Construction Workers Fund. These are some of the measures. But when it comes to the question of implementation during this period, not much has been happened. Not much has happened. It's all half-hearted. Didn't cover, let's say, substantial port. It left, let's say, the crisis of, let's say, deteriorating incomes of the lower income groups when it comes to the question of share in the national income. It is in this context, I would move on to that of the second period before the present crisis. That means, unless we understand the crisis begins with that of the shift towards that of neoliberal regime. And whatever we do, if we do not answer or touch, in fact, the whole world is moving to that of neoliberal regime, but if you look at them, the responses are to stem the tide of, let's say, deteriorating incomes of, let's say, the lower income groups. If you don't do that, if you don't address the employment security, employment quality, and let's say the whole of growth that builds in better employment, secure employment with that of better incomes, it is likely to continue the crisis. But therefore, when I move to that of 14, 15, I move to a situation where none of these things were addressed. In fact, what little the earlier regime did, the present regime did not even look at them, but they were in a mood of raising populist kind of, let's say, policies. And in fact, it's in this context, we refer to that of two critical kind of interventions by the state, which had a very far-reaching kind of a effect on the economy. In fact, already, see, if you are saying that the trend of distribution of income is increasingly moving upwards, and then lower levels of income earners do not have adequate, let's say, income, that would itself is a big signal as to what is happening with that of aggregate demand. This was not addressed. And what was done? The populist measures I am referring to are also very well known now. They have been very well addressed also. The demonetization, with one stroke, the kind of things that was done in the name of demonetization. And then, of course, in 2016, we have demonetization. Closely on the heels of it, you would find the GST. And they see that when it comes to the question of, I'm not going into the demonetization as how it has failed as a measure to unearth, let's say, black income. It's a total failure, but the kind of disruption it caused to the economy, at one stroke, 86% of currency being withdrawn, particularly the farming sector and then informal sector, MSMEs got affected, who run on the cash. It has done a damage from which it's very difficult to imagine that completely the economy has recovered. In fact, interestingly, the latest Reserve Bank of India annual report, which was released 2 weeks back, it also now recognizes the damages done by the demonetization, the disruption of the economy. But quickly, let me run through, because we may have to go to the kind of, let's say, disruption in fundamentals of the economy. You talk in terms of fundamental as a student of economics. What happened to savings? What happened to investment? Turn to that of, let's say, what happened to government investment? What happened to corporate investment? And then, you see, I will quickly run through this. There has been a decline. I mean, in 2011, there was a reworking of, let's say, the national income data, and then that was the base. And therefore, if you look at that base data, if you look from 2000, the national savings ratio as a proportion of GDP was something like 35%. It reached as low as 30.5% by 17-18, the sixth. I mean, in fact, I must, let's say, it's very interesting. With some delay, Interestingly, the latest Reserve Bank of India report says this. I think this is, I'm quoting from its report, page 20. A downturn set in during the last quarter of 2016-17. You can imagine the last quarter is the demonetization. And let's say the economic activity, it of course uses this language. The economic activity from then on lost speed over 8 successive quarters to touch a low of Q4. That is, I think, January, March this year, Q4 of 1920. And that's, of course, the well-known, the Q4 3.2, that year ended with that of 4.1%. That has not been seen in, it also says, of course, now it says that such a low kind of, let's say, continuous decline for 8 consecutive quarters in the growth rate has not been seen in the history right from 11-12. I mean, then all components of domestic, this is more important. In fact, even in the last annual report, Reserve Bank did emphasize the demand side, but now all components of domestic demand were driven down, except, of course, a little bit of increase in government spending. So this crisis, when if you put them into different dimensions, I think that I would, let's say, since we have started, let's come back to the fundamentals. Not only the, I'll go up to that of this fourth quarter of 2019-20 and come back to that of the first quarter of this year. I mean this, yeah, first quarter of this year, that's April, June. That's much distressing story. Well, there was a steep decline in the investment, gross fixed capital formation, from 40% of the GDP in 11-12 to that of 31% by 17-18. And of course, there was contraction of public investment, and particularly one way of looking at is the central government expenditure as a ratio of the national income. And if you look at it, the central government expenditure, which was about 15% on the year when this regime came to power, 14-15, dropped down to that of, let's say, 12% in 18-19. Investment in agriculture as a share of agriculture GDP declined from 18% to that of 18%, again 11-12 to that of, let's say, 13.8%, 16-17. In fact, much of this, it's not public investment. Much of this investment, there is a decline, but this, even this, what remains as 13.8%, substantial portion. 85% of that is by farmers. And you know, 85% of farmers are also the small marginal. You can find the kind of investment which ultimately stress is on, let's say, the bottom in agriculture also. Even corporate investment declines steeply. In fact, there is a big story here. When it comes to this government, they appointed a high power committee, what is called as a high power panel, to rework the direct tax structure. This high power committee, which was appointed in 2016, finished its work and then was about to submit its report in September 17. But the government wanted it to be delayed. But that the outgoing chairman, it's a very interesting episode. It is described, but of course, described as a leakage. The chairman said that I have 3 volumes I am submitting and redesign. His term was over, he of course retired. And that volume, which is leaked, shows that the corporate sector investment, which was supposed to be 15% of GDP in 11-12, drops down to that of 2.5%, 16-17. That means why 16-17? Because of the constraining demand, the corporate sector is not willing to put more money into that of, let's say, further investment. I mean, this is the beginning of the larger crisis that we are seeing. It snowballs into, as we go on to that the first quarter of this year, it's a huge kind of a thing. There has been a sharp decline in the demand because lots of overall demand. There's lots of constraints on the wage growth. There's also declining wages. The minimum wage for, this is again another story. There is the so-called HIPOR committee, the expert committee on minimum wages, of which Professor Mahendra Dev was, I think, the chairman, which recommended a minimum wage of 375, which was not accepted. And then ultimately the government ends up with 178. Of course, they wanted to tinker with it by raising it by 20 rupees. I mean, agricultural prices during that period was also under pressure, and therefore it has substantially reduced demand from the farming sector. And these depressed wages and earnings in rural areas also was the reasons, one of the major reasons for this kind of migration we have seen. And I'm not going to get into migration because it requires substantial kind of a detail. I hope the lecture scheduled by Professor Ravi under the title, it's a fascinating title, Price of Precarity. I'm also waiting for that lecture that I leave here. And that about 81% of what this estimate suggests, again, during the 17-18 basis PLF has 81% of workers earn just about 15,000 a month, according to Labor Bureau's survey. And the median monthly income was about 10,000. Self-employed earn, let's say, 8,000. It's a very depressing situation. And the casual workers earned about, let's say, 5,000. I mean, these together support the kind of income distribution data we have. And if it's, I think, when it comes to the question of the employment during this period, one stroke, the CMIE, that's the only source that we have, the demonetization, CMA estimates, has struck off 1.5 million jobs. And then, of course, it's seen now, even before what we have seen visually, the migrant labor after the lockdown, much before that. We have news that automobile industries are shedding workers and they were migrating back. The textiles in Tirupur are shedding workers, they're going back. Surat diamond industry was losing workers because there's a depression, and then there's a demand depression, which has shed lots of people out of, let's say, work. But you know, I can go on with this, but okay, I'll just stop and then turn to that of what is the response of the government. This is, I think, where when you are referring to that, everybody was trying to suggest, including the Reserve Bank, the fundamental aspect that was emphasized even in the last annual report was that of declining demand. Instead of addressing demand for the revival of the economy, what is the kind of package? I'm talking about pre-COVID package. What was the response of the government before, let's say, I mean, during the period of this, I mean, in fact, when people are talking about slowdown, they were trying to give all kinds of, this is going to be soft landing, it's not structural, it is temporary. And some of those leaders of those parties were saying, this growth decline doesn't matter. That's the kind of attitude. And then responses, when people were emphasizing, people who knew the economy were emphasizing there is a demand crisis, why don't you revive the demand? On the other hand, what was actually happening is completely opposite. They were trying to play with that of supply responses. I mean, then in fact, supply responses of the kind, which is very, very liberal in the sense, now, the first act we could see in terms of public finance, because we know instead of infusing some kind of a resource into the hands of the people, they're trying to infuse resources in the hands of the top corporate sector. The first time, the response is corporate income tax was reduced from 30% to 25%. And then year after year, for instance, I can list this. For instance, in 17-18, the tax concessions given to the corporate sector was 93.6 thousand crores. In 18-19, the tax concessions were 108.7 thousand crores. In September, that's last budget, the tax concession given to corporate sector was 1.45 lakh crores. I mean, if you turn to that of RBI's response in the latest report, when you are giving tax concessions to the corporate sector, telling that this reduced tax collections from the corporate sector would induce them to invest more, and therefore growth will pick up. But the RBI has its own story. It said that first of all, when it comes to the question of when you say that you are giving concession to 1.45 lakh crores, for instance, the latest budget, it means that you are also giving away state share of 40%. And all these concessions progressively would also mean reducing share of state when you are talking about direct tax reductions. And then you are compensating central revenues by imposing cess in which states will not have. This is a very, very unfortunate, ingenious kind of exercise, and the entire hope that perhaps then what is the, besides of course the fiscal policy, the other side is privatization. They set a target of privatizing public sector units to the extent of 1 lakh crores. This is to come out of recession or whatever, declining growth. And then of course, when it comes to, there is pressure on RBI, and of course, it's justified to share more of its revenues. And all of us know that last year, 1.76 lakh crores from the RBI was given. And of course, there was the clear formula. In fact, this year it has gone down because of the decline in, let's say, the economic activity. The RBI, interestingly, at this point, repeatedly comes in. When it comes to the question of, I'll come back to this bank management. And then they are also trying to find a solution for the increasing what is called performing assets. Solution is that they would try to streamline write-off. I mean, there are two parts here. First, the CAG report shows that by 17-18, the tax arrears have increased from the previous period, 13-14, which was about 5.8 lakh crores. It increased to 11.1 crores. And CAG last line says 95% of these arrears may not be recovered. I mean, that's the history. And then he goes on to refer to that of, let's say, the NPA write-offs. For instance, the NPA write-off after, if you take into consideration April 2014, of the total 10 years of write-offs, this after 2014, that means if you take into consideration 2008 to that of 2018, the part that has been done, written off was 5.5 lakh crores of NPAs, which accounts for about 80% of the total write-offs done right from 2008. That means during the post 14-15, it's a liberal regime to that of corporate sector. Write-offs were done left and right. Taxes were not properly collected. Concessions were given indiscriminately and affecting, let's say, I mean, this is the sincerity. None in this long list of, let's say, interventions, there was none that has been considered as some kind of a fiscal infusement to improve demand. No, nothing of that kind. I'm talking about this pre-COVID kind of, let's say, package. And then, of course, it is during this period, the then Governor Rajan submitted a 12-page report to that of the Parliamentary Committee on Finance, trying to list, let's say, the kind of NPAs given. The people, he talks in terms of, this is quotation mark, that letter is released actually, unscrupulous promoters of industries. And then those who have over-invoiced the power sector equipment to the extent of 80% and made money, they are also in this list, but the list was never released. But what was happening? They see, add to this the GST kind of a trouble. I mean, the GST is a briefly, in fact, it's a very complicated thing everybody knows now. And then when it comes to the question of the way in which it was introduced, then the government hardly gave an ear. I mean, there are suggestions that at least GST should be streamlined before it's pushed through. Because, you know, if you look at the kind of GST collections, and this is it's a story by itself. See, if you look at, let's say, about the filing under GST was supposed to be roughly, that's I think in January 19, 1.39 crore assessees, of whom 92% were those who are filing less than 5 crores of turnover. It's not, of course, investment. And therefore, in fact, the problem was mostly in terms of the small kind of, let's say, producers. And then the major issues was the difficulties at the time in bifurcating what could be called as input and input services, and waiting for the invoices to be sorted out, what they refer to invoice matching, because you pay taxes and on the basis of invoices, get the input kind of, let's say, subsidies paid back by the government. I mean, this is a very complicated structure, because those who examined it suggested 95% of tax paid, GST tax, was by just 5% of these 1.39 crore assessees. They were suggesting you can do this stalling. You can begin with that of this top 5%. And also they were trying to say that you can exempt for some time the smaller ones and then work out. I mean, instead, in one stroke, the kind of slabs that you have, the kind of calculations that have to done, it's complicated the matter. And therefore, when we refer to that of the decline in industrial production, I think we have now data which shows that the manufacturing sector, which is affected, has a devastating kind of impact, because there was a continuous, this is again, this is a very detailed kind of a documentation by the RBI itself, which tries to show, for instance, with the declining kind of a performance, which is here. I think the fourth consecutive year of deceleration in the industrial growth. For instance, if you refer to that of 5% in 15-16, it becomes 2% in 17, 1% in 18, minus 1% in 19, minus 4.5% by 20. I mean, this decline is largely because of substantial part, the so-called informal, I mean, small MSMEs account for almost 50% of the total production. It was these which were affected by a combination of this demonetization and that of GST measures, which has caused substantial kind of a drop in, let's say, the industrial performance. It's a great fall. I mean, in fact, this is exactly where I think when you refer to that of this 8 quarters of roller skater kind of decline in, let's say, growth rates, substantial part of this decline was contributed, was because of the failure in the, let's say, informal sector substantially. And of course, the declining investments in the corporate sector. And this is exactly where I think we can take it up with this question of what is happening to banks. One of the measures introduced was bank merger. 10 banks, public sector banks, to be merged into 4. The idea seems to be more than, let's say, saving them, putting bad and good together, at the same time trying to reduce. There are, let's say, clear kind of, let's say, data available on the loss of employment. This is where I think the workers, particularly employees of the banks, are protesting, because there is a steep possibility of steep decline in employment in these mergers without achieving substantial kind of improvement in the performance of the banks. That's what perhaps many people try to suggest, mergers are no solution. Well, this is the situation. That means immediately after, this is immediately before the COVID. This is what either it is neoliberal regime in the first, let's say, more than 2 decades, it's almost 3 decades. And then, of course, what follows from 15, 16, and the kind of a crisis due to that of demonetization, and then, of course, GST that has affected the kind of revival. This is what I was referring to. The response measures are worse, actually. At least earlier, they recognized the problem in the early phase of neoliberal regime, introduced things like, at least half-heartedly, the social security legislation for unorganized sector workers, and then of course things like employment guarantee for rural workers, and then of course you also refer to that of building and other workers. These are all limited kind of measures, but all that are aimed at reviving some kind of security and demand. But none of the measures that I refer to, tax concessions or what is called as the privatization, none of them could be seen as things which would perhaps revive demand. They're all trying to push the supply up, which is contracting back. And that's exactly the response of the so-called policies in the period immediately before COVID. Then, of course, we know now, thanks to the latest quarter of GDP estimates, as well as other kinds of sources for perhaps employment and other things. What I do is that before, our focus is on what is the response of the government. Is there anything that would perhaps bring about improvement in the demand side and therefore help revive the economy? That would be the question when we examine the response of the state. But let me put this, since the data is now available and the last quarter, what exactly has happened after, let's say, imposition of 67 days of lockdown from March 24th onwards, and what type of responses the state has come out with. That will take, after referring to that, the magnitude of, let's say, the impact on the economy. And this is, I think, now, it's there in everybody's domain now, but I think I would just sum up as to what happened. I would just use the RBI and then, of course, the Ministry of the CSO kind of estimates. And then this is exactly what perhaps is coming up. That when we refer to that of, let's say, the whole of the economy, and of course the summary statement is now available, that about the economy has contracted in the first quarter. This is substantially because of lockdown, which brought almost 70% of the economic activities, with the exception of, let's say, agriculture, to almost stand still. And then the impact seems to have pulled down the growth to a negative zone of 24%. If you look at the details, if you look at, let's say, what could be called as private consumption demand during April, June, that is the first quarter of 2021. If you look at, let's say, it has come down by, let's say, almost 27%. Normally, the estimated share in the total national income of the private consumption is about, let's say, 56 to 60%. And then, of course, the investment share, what we call as gross fixed capital formation, is about 32%. And then, of course, the government expenditure is 10 to 12%. But when we look at the growth in these shares, and you look at, let's say, the private consumption expenditure, final consumption expenditure, the first quarter, it has drastically come down by 27%. And this is, I think, the worst thing has happened to that of investment. This is a continuation of the fundamentals. We have seen already investment as a GDP ratio coming down from, let's say, 40% to that of 31% earlier period. And this 32% has contracted by 47%, which means now investment has come down from 32% to that of 20%. This is unheard of in the long recent history of 30 years, that investment falling. Overall gross fixed capital formation falling down to that of, let's say, 20% of GDP. And the only saving grace, that means taken together, the final consumption demand collapse, and then of course the gross fixed capital formation, you come to that of, let's say, 23.9%, adjusting for government expenditure. And if you go by, let's say, the basic sectors, major, this is exactly where the consequences of this decline, the demand decline, it's very visible. No, this demand decline is visible. Anybody can account it. And then we go by sectors, the major employing sectors, like for instance, construction, which emerged as one of the major kind of, let's say, contributor to employment growth, has contracted by 50%. And of course, the trade, hotels, and then transport has contracted by 47%, manufacturing 23%. If these three sectors contract so heavily, the impact on employment would be very huge, as you could see from CMI. We come to that. And if you refer to that as individual, what is referred to as core sectors, you have fine either, all these run into that of, let's say, cement 38% decline, steel 57%. I can reel out this, most of these things are known. What perhaps I would do is just again come back to that of what kind of, let's say, that's perhaps some of these things can be taken up. When we come to that of, let's say, the response of the government in terms of what is called as the package, that ultimately they have come out with a big bang package of what is called as 20 lakh crores of revival of the economy. In fact, if one looks closely at it, it's also very well known by now. One of the ways that the government has been doing things is dramatize it. Everybody was expecting that the declining kind of a demand situation has to be addressed first. And then people were citing as to what is happening across the globe. That as to how countries were responding to that of, let's say, this COVID impacted economies, and then how they were trying to revive demand. And in fact, most of the measures were addressed directly in terms of infusing fiscal kind of measures and putting more resources into the hands of particularly the working class. And when we are expecting that a big bang announcement comes in May after a period of about almost 60 days, which shows that the total government intervention is of the magnitude of 20 lakh crores. This 20 lakh crores which have been announced includes all kinds of things. What is interesting is even the former vice chairman of this Niti Aayog, he himself commented saying that it is something like putting apples and oranges together, all kinds of things, because this includes not much of, let's say, fiscal infusion, but it includes a lot of credit infusion to that of different sectors. And it takes into, for instance, I will just come back to this package of 20 lakh crores. I would start with that. What is this 5.7 lakh crores of RBI? It's essentially trying to, let's say, incentivize banks to, let's say, borrow at relatively low rates from the Reserve Bank, and then, of course, lend at low rates to that of, let's say, the investors. And therefore, in this process, over a period of time, during this almost 2 years, Reserve Bank has been reducing what is referred to as the repo rate, the rate at which banks borrow from the Reserve Bank, so that this reduced one point, its reduction ranged from beginning to that of 1% to that of, let's say, 1.75%, 1.7% now. And then when we refer to that of, let's say, whether the banks actually are able to, let's say, lend. In fact, on the contrary, I mean, this is the major part of this 20 lakh crores. The accounting is that of 20 lakh crores, 5.7 lakh crores are likely to be the induced additional resources infused into that of banks, which can lend to that, which can be lent to that of, let's say, investors. Are the investors borrowing it? I mean, this question, Reserve Bank, I quote this latest annual report. It says, the weakening of growth impulses and subdued credit offtake are playing out, with sporadic credit default events and incidents of frauds exasperating and leading to that of reluctance of the banks to lend. This is starkly evident in the slowdown of flow of resources, both from the banks and non-banks to the commercial sector in the first half of, let's say, 1920. And this continues during this. The confidence is still overall in economic activity yet to revive. In fact, Reserve Bank is trying to admonish the banks as to why they are not lending. And then I think when it comes to the question of what actually banks are doing, the Reserve Bank has a sad story to tell here. I mean, the story is that while the Reserve Bank is reducing interest rates, I mean, that repo rate, the banks are keeping their resources without lending because of their risk averseness, and then putting that money that they have accumulated kind of deposits. So you could see here the interesting kind of a situation where the banks would now prefer to not lend to that of, let's say, the commercial or industrial sector at low interest, but they are prepared to invest their accumulated deposits in that into the Reserve Bank of India at reverse repo rate, the rate that Reserve Bank pays. In the process, it's a very interesting situation. See, for instance, with all this, what one expects is in this quarter, there should be an increase in, let's say, the so-called, let's say, when you take in terms of deposits and then credit, there should be an increase. But the Reserve Bank of India says that in this quarter, deposits increased by 11.1 lakh crores. I mean, and then when it comes to the credit given by them has come down by 5.5%, which means that about 5.37 lakh crores are the ones which the banks are lending now, compared to that of, let's say, that's supposed to be credit, compared to that of what they have received as deposits, which runs into that of, let's say, almost 8 lakh crores. What do they do with the balance? They are taking it to that of, very interestingly, to the Reserve Bank. That means they are investing in government securities, and in the process, what happens when the banks put the money into that of Reserve Bank of India? This is what the Reserve Bank says. The Reserve Bank's earnings have come down. The Reserve Bank says that the increasing deposits by the banks at the repo rates by the banks in the Reserve Bank has led to that of a decline in the income, because Reserve Bank earns interest income when it lends to the banks at repo rate. But Reserve Bank loses interest when the banks deposit that money into the Reserve Bank. See, according to the Reserve Bank latest report says that the earnings of the Reserve Bank declined by 1.4 lakh crores or by 22% because it had to pay huge interest to banks instead of lending, had parked this money with that of Reserve Bank under reverse repo rate. Therefore, the chain reaction is even the dividend paid to that of Government of India out of the interest earnings, the Reserve Bank also goes down. That means it's a very strange situation. The point I'm trying to make is that when you refer to a situation where the banks are full with resources, but they are averse to lend. But why they are not lending? It's a simple logic. Why they are not lending? Because the demand is low. And why the demand is low? The people have to be provided adequate purchasing power to generate, let's say, demand for, let's say, the goods or services in these sectors. Now, it's a very strange, I mean, the whole system of approaching, I have not come to that of, let's say, the other parts. I'm saying the approach of, let's say, trying to play on the credit and infusion of liquidity instead of infusion of the fiscal resources to stimulate demand, playing on the supply side has not paid off, or rather it has led to that of adverse kind of a consequences. And of course, if in this package, now of course, people have made estimates of this 20 lakh crores, of course, 20 lakh crores, there is nothing by way of incentive for, by way of fiscal incentive this. Now we leave this 5.7 lakh crores of Reserve Bank. We come back to that of, let's say, they have brought in what they announced in March, 1.7 lakh crores, of which already budgeted amount for NGRA and other measures was more than half, that's 73,000 crores. And the actual money that's flowing in the form of, let's say, additional kind of employment generating, even it could be 40,000 crores additional money that goes to that of, let's say, MGNREGA, could be, which is estimated to be something like 0.6%. And similarly, when it comes to the question of MSMEs, the whole package of MSMEs, 5.9 lakh crores, is substantially credit driven kind of a package. That 3 lakh crores, it's also, accounting is also very amusing. 3 lakh crores are supposed to be given to MSEs as a, what is called a security free, I mean, what is called a guarantee by the government. I mean, the government would give, or let's say, lose 3 lakhs by way of, let's say, supporting the MSMEs only if they fail to repay. It takes long term to see as to you give a guarantee to MSMEs to the extent of 3 lakh crores for their borrowing. The understanding is if they fail, these are all unsecured loans, and then government is giving a security. If they fail to pay, we will pay, government will pay. But is that an account that to be added to that of infusion of additional kind of a deposits in the bank? I mean, this only when they fail, your intervention comes in. If they repay, there is no possibility of, let's say, that means you're only inducing the banks to pay, which, as we have seen from the Reserve Bank report, they're refusing to pay because they are bothered about their lending becoming NPA because of the lack of, let's say, guarantee that their borrowers would perform. And the borrowers are insecure because of lack of demand, because it's a chain kind of a reaction. And of course, there are measures. So let me try to say that the measures relating to that of, let's say, distribution of food, to that of, let's say, migrant workers, and then increasing, let's say, the rations to that of, let's say, for all PDS holders, 80 crore people that would get, let's say, the additional grain and, let's say, the pulses. And then, of course, what is estimated 8 lakh crores of migrant workers who would get, let's say, this 5 kg of grain per person and 1 kg per family. In fact, all these are bloated estimates. Out of these so-called, I mean, they also came back saying that they didn't know estimates of migrant workers who would, let's say, come for the grain. And then therefore, they just estimated the total amount that perhaps is involved in providing the grain of 5 kgs to 8 crores of people. But there are no 8 crores of people, not many states. In fact, Telangana has not taken this at all because they themselves through the PDS are giving substantial money. Therefore, there are, even in cases where there would be real income infusion through that of providing free or subsidized kind of, let's say, food grains, there are overestimates. And therefore, this entire, and there are also ingenious accounting. For instance, there is accounting for additional income going into the hands of the people by reducing the contribution to that of PF from 12.5% to 10%. Of course, when it comes to the question of the law, what they refer to in MSMEs, to the extent that the government itself says that it would give matching kind of a contribution. This estimate comes to that of something like 24,000 crores. But the rest of PF, for instance, even for people who have higher, let's say, incomes, more than, let's say, the cutoff mark is something like 15,000. Those who earn more than 15,000, their contribution to PF is reduced from 12.5 to that of 10%. They say that this difference of 2.5% is additional income going into the hands. This is our own income. And to the extent I reduce my contribution from 12.5% to that of 10%, I lose my, let's say, savings in PF. And then they also, this is very ingenious. They have delayed or deferred what is called as the tax deducted at source. That means if my monthly tax deducted per month is postponed to October or November, that they're calculating as additional money in my hands. It's my own money. You're going to lump sum collect it. The whole tax has to be collected. If you're going to collect it from, if not in, let's say, every month, you do it in March to that of, that is January to March, all the money. And this kind of calculation bloats up entire package which comes here as, let's say, the so-called intervention of 20 lakh crores, and which doesn't show any confidence that they're addressing the real problem of reviving, let's say, the so-called essential side. Everyone is suggesting there should be more of, let's say, income flowing into that of those who have lost their jobs. And then the loss of jobs, according to CMI, that's the only data, peaks to that of 27% by let's say April. And then in states like Bihar and then Jharkhand, it goes to that of 48%. And under these circumstances, the kind of money, of course, additional money given 40,000 crores to employment guarantee, what reports we get is, as usual, the 100 days are kept as the highest limit, and the implementation is tardy. And therefore, what is going in is still in many places 40 to 48% who are getting, that's the telephonic information that people are reporting. They're getting jobs. And then when it comes to the question of their wages, of course, they are trying to pay that 2002, it's 20 rupees more than earlier. And then, of course, delayed payment. And then I think half the people not getting work, only 100 days if they get, and then the payments are made delayed. This is also undoing the possibility of better kind of infusion into that of poor people by way of additional income through that of these marginal improvements in income through that of employment guarantee. But I think it's under these circumstances, I think I would only sum up the estimates given as to how much of these 20 lakh crores are actually, I mean, whether it is perhaps MSMEs or agriculture. In fact, agriculture is, this is, I think, the last part I must mention, then the policy intervention. See that this has something to do with that of, let's say, the introduction of the neoliberal policies in 1991, a package of structural reforms. And then there was a constraint when there was a demand in 90s and 2000 early, second set of reforms. There were kind of, let's say, opposition and also some constraint. But actually, if you look closely into it, this package is in terms of a disguised extension of what may be called as, what may be referred to as the continuation of the structural adjustment program. Because, you know, if you refer to, if structural adjustment is what may be called as the increasing privatization as a part of it, you would find that there are, I mean, it's also interesting that more than the government's own detailed kind of a, because they have confused people by putting them, as somebody said, everything together, not to see it clearly what are the kinds of components. But I think now it's the Reserve Bank report, which perhaps at least trying to, let's say, put them in footnotes, which comes out with that of, let's say, the details of some of these things. If you look at, let's say, what is the nature of intervention, agriculture and industry? See, it's remarkable that how it is covered up. See, the Reserve Bank spells it out saying there are administrative reforms in agriculture. And this is what we refer to. What are these administrative reforms in agriculture? Of course, they talk in terms of, there are other things also. There are 8 programs like, you know, agricultural infrastructure fund. Imagine we are talking in terms of present crisis, this agricultural infrastructure fund is to be spent in next 10 years. It's no answer. And then of course, it's needed, but not immediate measure. And therefore herbal cultivation. And then of course, greening. There are some tomatoes, there are programs for tomatoes and onions, micro food enterprises, animal husbandry, Prime Minister's Matsya Yojana. So these are all very marginal kind of things, very little help into perhaps helping agriculture. But major thing is 3 ordinances. This is what it is. And in fact, it is not without significance. Many of our commercial agricultural experts in economics have started, let's say, praising it. We have come back to that of 1991 moment. What is it? 3 ordinances. First ordinance is on, let's say, delisting of agricultural commodities from Essential Supplies Commodities Act, Essential Commodities Act, and then Farmers Produce Trade Act. Let's say making the entire, this is, I think, one word we keep on hearing now, seamless movement of agricultural commodities. That means it's a big blow to that of what we have as the APMCs, agricultural production marketing, agricultural product marketing committees. I mean, there are defects, but instead of reforming existing regulatory structures, they're removing all regulations. And then the third one is the ordinance relating to that of contract farming, of course, in the name of empowering farmers. How many, if you serve 85% small marginal farmers, we have no idea as to how many of them can contract with that of, let's say, commercial interest for selling their produce, or let's say starting their renewed diversification of crops. This is the one major kind of thing. There are many people, you must have heard, there are, I think, parallel what is called as Jan Lok Sabha going on. Right now in Andhra Pradesh, there is Praja Assemblies going on, because the parliament don't discuss And therefore, one of the concerns expressed by farmers in the Jan Lok Sabha or what is called, they say Lok Sabha, is that these three ordinances are likely to have devastating effect. Because, you know, one exception to all that I have not mentioned deliberately is agriculture seems to be doing well. I mean, agriculture has been doing well in terms of production. But my question is, even when agriculture experienced 3 to 4% increase in the first quarter, the question that is not asked is what happened to the farmers' own incomes during that so-called lockdown period. Many of them were not able to sell their perishable vegetable products. Milk selling became a problem. Poultry products got a hit, and many of them suffered. And that doesn't count. This is the trend in agriculture. Agriculture performs well, agricultural producers suffer. I mean, that dimension doesn't come through that of, let's say, the green picture of agriculture that comes in. And then turn to that of industry. In fact, this package, I'm talking about this 20 lakhs package again. These three ordinances are included in this so-called 20 lakhs package. I don't know how, there is no money involved, but they've included, because I do feel this is structural reform. You are moving even in agriculture, because there are many people who are asking why you are keeping some kind of regulation in agricultural marketing. Leave the whole country as a market. We don't know what happens. If this year's Kharif has a bumper crop over that of last Kharif crop, the surpluses come in, that who would perhaps assures them through this opening of the market to that of private traders, what kind of resource, incomes farmers would get. One must perhaps wait and see. Let me turn to that of the structural adjustment in industry. They say this is clear, and then this is also given as a footnote in page 38 of Reserve Bank report, what they are going to do as structural reforms in industry. That means whatever left over. You see, in 1991, when you refer to that of privatization, there were still some sectors which were reserved for reserved for public sector. But now you see the list in the footnote. This is, I think, is the one. Of course, everybody knows them. Coal, minerals, defense, of 253 products in defense, airspace management, power distribution companies, social infrastructure projects, space sectors, and atomic energy. All these are now open. In many of them, 100% private foreign investment. In fact, I didn't mention of the incentives given is removing of surcharge on private foreign investors' capital gains. That's one of the incentives. They want them to come and invest here. Therefore, you know, while people are looking for a direction in terms of more of resources flowing into their hands, the state seemed to be moving into that of a different direction, putting more of, let's say, opportunities, in the name of opportunities, opening up and giving concessions and taxes and other things to the corporate sector. But it may not work. Even these concessions, it's quite obvious it doesn't work. But still, if you look at some of the economic advisors to the government, they are saying there is a V-shape waiting. But I don't know. We wish that there should be a V-shape. But I would just like to close, before I close, the kind of, let's say, dreams that are being raised. On the one hand, the whole of 16, 17 down to this day is one crisis of the other. They have introduced what is called as Make in India. What is happening to Make in India? And let's say the objective was that the total manufacturing sector share from 16%, 17% in the total national production, they want to raise it to that of 25% by 22, 22. So all these are grand statistics that manufacturing sector must grow. And then what has actually happened to the manufacturing sector between 11 and 17, 18? Manufacturing sector, which was of course 16, 17, in 17, 18, in 19, so it just started, let's say, because of this demonetization, GST, what has happened to manufacturing is the growth rate, which was 13% in manufacturing sector in 15, 16, has come down to 0 in 19, 20. And instead of, let's say, going to 25%, it's contracting further. And then, of course, they said there would be doubling of farmers' income by 2022. And there would be 100 lakh crores in infrastructure development by 2023. And of course, the much more grand is by 24, 25, there will be 5 trillion economy. India would become. None of these things have anything to do with that of what is happening at the ground level. These are all empty slogans. And in fact, if they were to move in this direction, at least they may have to begin with that of more realistically somewhere. I mean, I would just like to close by referring to what other countries, it's not, see, in fact, if you refer to that of the slowdown, you see, if you have countries after countries, although we are on top, the first quarter of this year, April, June, we lost, let's say, 25% of the national income. But all other countries have lost. Our I think, inspiring other country, UK lost about 22%, France lost 19%, Germany 11%, Japan 10%, and of course, US, interestingly, it's only 9%. What is that they're doing? What is that they're doing? They're all lost, and we are lost. What is that they're doing? I quote from The Economist a few weeks back. This is what they're trying to sum up. What they're doing by way of intervention. That's what when my title talks in terms of intervention by the state or intervention. In this crisis, I quote this, never before have governments created safety nets as generous as those they have created during this pandemic. In Britain, 7.5 million furloughed workers' wages are being paid in large part by the state. In France, the government is topping up majority of private sector workers' incomes after their hours were cut. They are paying for the compensation for the cut hours. America has increased unemployment benefit by $800 per person per week, almost trebling the average payout. There are also criticism that some of them get more than, as unemployment allowance, more than they earn sometimes. Since March, a staggering 35 million claims for this in the US support has come in, 34, they pay for that. Germany and Japan have boosted their existing subsidy schemes for furloughed or partially furloughed workers. All these are addressed to the workers. And India, of course, what perhaps is, there are repeated kind of, let's say, requests you have to improve your NREGS, increase the number of days, increase the kind of, let's say, payment, and you can extend the kind of activities, bring in urban NREGA kind of measure, and then there are suggestions, at least a small doses of income for 3 to 4 months of 6,000 to 7,000 per person could be paid. And all these can be paid because, you know, the last question that perhaps would come is, where from you pay? Where did people pay when they're in a circumstance like this? It's a war-like situation, and this is a temporary kind of a situation. You don't have to get tied down to that of FRBM. It doesn't lead to that of any money that you're paying NREGS workers or what you're paying Jandan workers or Jandan holders, or if you give to that of poor people 5-6 crores, or increase the so-called PM Kisan from this big slogan, upfront 2,000, make it 6,000 and make it, let's say, even 10,000 for farmers per year. And no, 2,000. I mean, these could be increased without, let's say, much of, let's say, fanfare. None of them would lead to that of inflation. It's a big kind of, let's say, farce. And then it was done under such circumstances. It's capable. India can do it if he really wants it. Otherwise, of course, we are in for a kind of, I mean, I'm only saying, last question everybody would ask is the government fiscal question. I'm trying to say it can be managed because all these countries are managing. It's unusual circumstances. It doesn't lead to that. Many of the things that we have listed as infusement, fiscal infusement to the hands of low income kind of people is not likely to lead to that of, let's say, inflation. On the contrary, that is the only way you can revive demand. You can increase banks to lend more, borrow more from the Reserve Bank. All these credit policies would become real when you have, let's say, demand stimulating kind of, let's say, infusion. And therefore, I would like to, I mean, I'm sorry, I must have exceeded my time limit. I would like to just close by this particular sentence. God does not deliberately play dice with the people. It is dangerous for governments to play dice with people in the name of God. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. As all of us have predicted, it is a feast. And of course, it's a feast for this Teachers' Day commemoration lecture. Of course, I felt that I'm sitting in Indian Economic Thought class, basically 1 hour, 45 minutes. It's a non-stop lecture, and it's a thought-provoking and very interesting. Started from the neoliberal shift to the structural shift and whatnot. And I can't describe the way in which that you have critically analyzed. And of course, this is the need of the hour. And I would have, I wish that, if many students, if they would have attended, it's a great feast. And also not only the students, even for us, it's a great feast that, after a long time, I have a fortunate now to listen the Indian Economic Thought lecture, right from the beginning. Beginning and the neoliberal shift and the economic crisis before COVID-19 and after COVID-19 and the response of the government. And of course, it's a thought-provoking lecture. And I just take up Professor Kannan is here and Dr. Ravindra here, and the set of questions. And of course, to start with our chairperson, and there's a Bhanumurthy here, base vice chancellor, and Rajendra Mamgain here. So I'll just take this set of questions first. First, our chairperson, Professor Sugata Thorat, then Professor Ravindra, and then Professor Kannan, and then Professor Bhanumurthy. Kindly don't leave, and Rajendra Mamgain from NIRD Hyderabad. So I request our chairperson Sugata Thorat to put your reflection on Professor Reddy's the great talk.
Thank you very much.
Then I will come back to our colleagues, and
Yeah.
Gayatri there, Kalasitaram is there. I'll come back to them. Yeah.
Thank you, Madheshwaran. Am I audible?
Yes, yes, of course.
Okay. Well, we are really grateful to Professor Narasimha Reddy for a very insightful and informative analysis of the earlier period, but more importantly during the COVID period. And I do not want to in greater detail on anything. I'll make 2 points, and 1 point will be, of course, for his reflections. He has very rightly said that the focus is on supply side, but that supply side has not also substantially worked, since it is mainly through the credit channel. So that is the story. But he's also emphasizing very constantly that right from the beginning, right from the first day, all eminent economists, it began with Rajan and Amartya Sen and Banerjee, everybody, Kaushik Basu, Professor Kannan and others, at the pitch of their voice, they expressed that please deal with the demand side. And with the same force, we find a near neglect of the demand side, as Professor Reddy has rightly pointed out, except something on the Narega. So that seems to be the main thing that come out from this. I just want to have one clarification, Professor Narasimha Reddy, if you can reflect upon on a very good lecture. And that point is that the close down of the economy, decline in the income, decline in employment has not affected the Indian masses uniformly. Some are affected more than others. And we all know that those who are engaged in the informal sector have been badly hit. The bulk of them who are engaged in construction and elementary job have been affected most badly. Migrant worker is a part of that. A very high proportion of the poor and the socially deprived group like scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, OBC are engaged, SC, ST particularly engaged in construction and the elementary jobs, which are very, very badly affected. Petty self-employment is very badly affected. So would you just reflect on this a section which has been affected badly, and that not much is being done to put purchasing power in their hands so that they can demand? We heard the stories of malnutrition, undernutrition, hunger, and possibly death. Could you reflect on that side, that a section of the population which is affected very badly, what is happening to them? Or at least some prediction or some guesswork. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Sir, 4 or 5 questions we'll take, then we'll go to the next batch. And second, I invite Dr. Ravindra to reflect upon Professor Narasimha Reddy's lecture. Dr. Ravindra? Okay. Dr. Ravindra? I think he got cut. Anyhow, he'll come back. And I request Bhanumurthy and then Professor Kannan, because Kannan requested me. I request Professor Bhanumurthy, the Vice Chancellor of BASE, and he's also a direct student to Professor Reddy, and right from yesterday he has been talking about his teacher. So now it is a chance for you to commemorate your teacher.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Professor Madheshwaran. First of all, let me wish my teacher, Dr. Narasimha Reddy, a very happy Teachers' Day.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I can recall all my learnings on Indian economy and especially the research methodology course. I think that was very, very unforgettable, and I'm going to implement that research methodology course even in this university. So I think that way it's a tribute to Professor Narasimha Reddy for that course. In fact, today he has made many powerful points. Without PowerPoint, he made very, very powerful points. I think that's what is very important. Some of them are known. In fact, we have been hearing his views even during in this class on the Indian economy. But sir, actually, I don't have many questions. I just have only one question, just to supplement what Professor Thorat has pointed out. I completely agree with Professor Thorat's points, especially the supply response being weak, despite many measures that has been made towards improving the supply chain. And the second is the kind of regional issues in the way the whole COVID as well as the policy measures that have been brought to address this COVID and its impact on the regional is very, very important. And I've been arguing that, one cannot have a top-down approach. I know you have concentrated heavily on the central government today, but I think more than the central government, I think what is important right now, as Professor Thorat very clearly pointed out, to look at how the regional issues, how the the policies have impacted at the local level. We have state governments. I don't know what we need to say about the state governments. Many of the policies that have been brought in need to be implemented by the state governments as well as the district as well as the local governments. So I think there are some measures. I agree. Some of them are not really measures. Some of them doesn't really have any allocations. But I think one needs to understand in terms of the implementation, that's going to be much more challenging. You rightly pointed about the NREGA type policy at the urban. I think many of us have been arguing about it. Of course, the government is yet to come out with those measures. But to be fair to the government, I think right now, if you look at in terms of the governance, in terms of the speed of implementation, I think the rural sector is one which is the low-hanging fruit. And in my view, the government has done more. But I think, in fact, even in my lecture, I said that they need to do much more. Whether this is the right time, especially when you talk about demand creation, or if you want to revive the supply chains, I guess the government, some of the statements that have been made by the government, I think we will be seeing some more measures. In fact, the expenditure secretary very clearly mentioned it is not whether the government is going to come out with the stimulus measures, and I think it's only the timing. I think they are looking forward to come out with these stimulus measures. I'm just trying to just add to what Professor Thorat has said. But otherwise, I thoroughly enjoyed. I'm very happy to hear after a very, very long time, sir. Thank you so much, and take care of your health, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Banamati. Dr. Ravindra has come back, and I request Dr. Ravindra to give you a reflection. Dr. Ravindra?
It's still muted.
Dr. Ravindra, you have muted. Can you come back? You please unmute it, sir. Okay, let him come back once again, and the time is very short, and I now request Professor Kannan to give his reflection on Professor Reddy's lecture.
Thank you, Professor Madheshwaran. I think like my previous commentators, I must also join in congratulating Professor Reddy in giving us a fairly comprehensive treatment of how our country has got into a rut. Not just because of COVID, but due to a set of policies that very well preceded COVID. If I may say so, I think what we are now witnessing is that the demonetization that was announced in November 2016 is likely to be marked as a turning point in the downward spiral of the Indian economy in recent times. What I am somewhat surprised is that there is as yet no official recognition of the impact that the demonetization has made, especially to the micro and small scale sector enterprises, and consequently of the large majority of the workers who are informally employed. So taken together, I think that has been the beginning of the downward slide of the Indian economy. Of course, Professor Narasimha Reddy is also well known for his political economy analysis. I think in this lecture, he has not made it explicit, but it is quite implicit in his treatment of the subject, that there is a strong political economy element which is expected for any ruling regime. And I think this particular ruling regime, if you take it as a regime of accumulation, there are different regimes of accumulation. And in this regime of accumulation, they came with an excessive faith in the neoliberal doctrine for economic policy and continues to have much faith in the supply side economics, even at a time when most of the countries where the supply side economic originated are having serious rethinking. I think that is a cause for worry. And I think as professional economists, we have a duty to understand and analyze why there has been such a rigid hanging on to a neoliberal doctrine when that is under re-examination the world over. Thirdly, I fully agree with Professor Torret for pointing out, for flagging the social dimension of this, not only the slide down of the economy, but also the COVID-related disastrous depression that we have seen. I must say here, the estimates that were prepared by a team of economists, including Banumati, the NCAR combined NI PFP forecast for growth, that now seem considerably underestimates when these results of the first quarter came out. Some of us wondered, when 40 or more % of the workers lost their jobs and earning opportunities, how come the economic impact was so little as estimated earlier by some of our finest economists? I therefore would appeal to our young researchers to apply their attention to the social dimension of some of these consequences, especially on loss of work, loss of earnings, wages, and loss of livelihoods, and how that is going to be a drag on the future course of the economy unless drastic steps to improve their income conditions and thereby the demand emanating from those large sections of the people are attended to. The fourth point I just want to flag is that there is also along with the social dimension, of course, we cannot expect in one lecture all the dimensions to be brought out, but it was quite implicit and also he made it explicit in certain contexts. The employment dimension, just as the social dimension is not equally on all social sections of the people, the employment dimension is also unequal. And we have the pre-COVID situation when there was a positive growth in the economy between 11, 12 and 17, 18. What happened in the employment side is a net loss, that is a collapse on the employment front. So you have had a growth experience without an employment experience. In fact, a negative employment experience. That means even the existing people have lost their jobs. I think if you put together the employment dimension and the social dimension, and there are already empirical work that says it has also been borne largely by the less educated, by the rural, by the women, and consequentially likely to be mostly those belonging to the socially disadvantaged groups, if not exactly all the socially disadvantaged group, but some of them have had a larger share in the burden of loss of employment. So these are some of the points that I just want to flag, and something of a challenge that I think our younger professional members will have to take into account. I just have one small comment to make about what Banamati said. I think he said it with good intentions, that if only the state and local governments implement the government of India's policies, the situation would have been somewhat better. I agree with him only to the extent of some policies, as in the case of NREG, although there has been only a limited increase in the budget allocation. It's a demand driven, but that's not well respected. But I would caution the state and local governments to implement all the policies. If they implemented the minimum wage policy of the government of India, most of the southern states, the workers will have less income. And that's the kind of national minimum wage that they have set up. If they ask the state governments to privatize all whatever their public utilities are, whatever little public sector control is there, then that will also be a disaster for the state's economy. Similarly, in the case of agriculture, the government of India gives 500 rupees a month. That's 6,000 rupees a year for the farmers. Your state governments like Telangana gives, I suppose, around 6,000 to 8,000 rupees per farmer, per hectare or per acre, I don't know what's the unit, which is a big difference. So I would caution state and local governments in following policies that will put them back in time and only concentrate on policies that will benefit them. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Dr. Ravindra has some system problem that he could not see, he could not hear. But anyhow, I'll call upon Professor Rajendra Mamgain from NIRD, Hyderabad.
Thank you. I think it has been a great opportunity today for me, and I extend my pranam to all my teachers. And teachers means that who have been there for at different stages of life, and they from them you learn. So it's a great respect, great day for us also. And I congratulate Professor D.M. Reddy sir for giving such a very detailed talk about the whole scenario of Indian economy, and particularly the post-COVID period and the government policies and programs. I think that in context of rural India, it is being now seen in a big way that it is somebody, as Professor Bhanumurthy was saying, it's a low-hanging fruit. Somebody is saying it's an engine of growth. But I think there is what Professor Kannan was saying. It's a kind of this is largely a policy myopia. And this policy myopia, in the sense of that it's over centralization policy, and I think we are not seeing at the ground level, at the regional level. The example is that and this is a question for Dr. Reddy also, because and he knows that now that we are talking about the migrants, that people are saying that those who are the reverse migrants, they should be here, they should be retained in the villages, and some local employment opportunities must be created for them. But if you see the kind of investment patterns, if you see the kind of the whole strategy, where are the employment opportunities? And that employment opportunity, as the demand generation for these employment opportunities is not happening. And as a result, the number of people are again migrating in the distance to the village, to the cities. Though of course in the initial stages they may be getting good wages again by coming to the cities, but the kind of whole strategy, for example, in Uttar Pradesh, they said that they will be doing the skill mapping of all migrant workers. They did the skill mapping, but where is the utilization plan? And that utilization plan, I think they were trying to amalgamate or match it with the local MSMEs, but MSMEs that hardly exist. So I think this is a kind of policy dichotomy, and this policy dichotomy, how it is going to be overcome, it's a big question. And I think this is what I'd like to listen something from Professor Reddy on this issue.
Thank you, Mamgain. And this is the first set of questions. Second set of questions, I request Professor Gayatri, Professor Devendra Babu here, and Kalasri. The third set of questions. Another two questions is from the chat. Then the whole session, the question session will be over, sir. I don't want you to wait for the second set of questions because I'm just giving a kind of a preparedness for the sequence of the lecture. For the second set is Professor Gayatri, Professor Devendra Babu and Kala Sridhar, and then 2 questions from the chat box. Now, the second, now I request you to reflect upon the first batch of questions which have been raised.
I think I must thank my distinguished colleagues for the questions. And in fact, they also know that it's very difficult to answer in the sense, particularly the supply side not responding. In fact, I have been reading after the Reserve Bank submitted its annual report 2 weeks back, the way in which the governor has been talking. I have clippings. He is admonishing banks for not lending. And he is giving a lecture saying that, you know, your responsibility is not to keep the resources with you or with the Reserve Bank and earn interest. You must have dedication to that of generating productive activities by lending. Don't withdraw with the fear of what is called as risk aversion. This is the situation. Because, you know, the banks are scared, particularly because the kind of accumulations that they have. In fact, I didn't mention there are lots of jokes also. The Reserve Bank itself says, somewhere here, during this period, it should be a very cautious period because this government came at a time saying that there was crony capitalism, a lot of things were given to that corporate sector. But if you look closely at the Reserve Bank reports, the fraud occurrence has increased in this quarter by 23%. Frauds, bank frauds I'm talking about. And then there is a continuous increase in NPAs. And they're all very powerful people. The letter I mentioned of the Rajan, I know whom he is talking about. I know because I have worked on the demonetization, trying to explain that demonetization doesn't mean taking money from somebody who is kept in cash. It comes through that of particularly trade, over invoicing, under invoicing. Rajan later talks in terms of NPAs through more than 100% over invoicing of what is imports. This is the group which is, I think I mentioned the name because it's there now. It's there everywhere in the press. Guardian has written about it. I have given references also. It's Adani. Thousands of crores routed through that of Dubai and other places. On Maharashtra, entire building of electrical, what is called as the major high power lines, building of power plants, and then import invoices. Now, this is well known, and therefore, when it comes to the question of the kind of powerful people involved in trying to push the banks, they are cautious. And the supply side would respond only when you have a demand. Let's see, I open my, if MSMEs, I open my tea shop, I open my restaurant, if there are people coming in. And therefore, I go and then try to borrow. But if people are not coming, there is an increase in COVID incidences. I'm scared of going because it's doubling now. What happened in 3 months is happening in 1 month. I don't see any such brisk kind of a demand generated. And of course, people do not have much money. In fact, one of the pathetic things is most of the housemaids, there are about, in the country, 30 lakhs of people. Most of them are out and they are there just keeping a basket of vegetables on the road because they don't have, I mean, this is the situation. And therefore, supply response not being there is largely because, again, linked to that of demand. I mean, I totally agree on the social dimension. In fact, I wanted to raise that here while discussing employment, because there is a paper which I wrote for the House Journal of ISEC on the employment impact of COVID. In that, there are some tables. Of course, it's CMI data. I've asked him to split them social group wise, because what little data we have, for instance, if you look at the farm sector, between 2004-5, in two batches, 11-12 and then 17-18, 5 crores of people who are engaged in farm sector have moved out. And if you look closely at them, substantial proportion of those who have moved out are from SC/STs. And in fact, there is also a bimodal kind of a movement because they into that of urban areas. Those who are very rich have gone for commerce accumulation. Those who are very poor have gone to that of casual urban migrant labor. And then one could perhaps bring in the social dimension of these workers. In fact, I hope Mangai asked for 2 tables. Actually, he has data on 4 occupations. I'm asking him retabulate it with caste composition. Who lost? It will come, let's say, very easily. And there is another table on education also. Those who are less than certain education have lost. Who are they? Both the tables, I think Mangai is there looking at me. He will do that. It is, I think it's a major question. Social, I mean, as Kannan says, that these are, of course, very closely linked, the employment and social dimension of employment. And of course, now I think there may be Madheswaran is enjoying swinging himself in the chair. He will have a lecture on this education policy. I don't have time. I wanted to build into that of the structures. If you read closely the so-called new education policy, it's a part of the structural transformation, which is directly against the interests of the social groups. I mean, somebody must bring that in when we discuss it. And then I think Mangai's reference to MSMEs. In fact, the problem, I think there are studies and then there is a report also. The problem with MSEs, there is the range is 6.3 crore MSEs, employing about 11 crore people. But you see, the bottom of MSMEs, there is no stability in the sense that you start MSME, you close MSME. What has happened with the COVID is many people have shut the shop and gone. You don't know whether he is again going for a casual labor. I mean, interestingly, you can add under MSMEs the rural private schools because many of them you would see that I'm getting everyday newspapers, the teachers going as NRG workers. They're all private school teachers, particularly in states like Andhra Pradesh. There is this extensive expansion of private schools, low fees, teachers are paid 5,000. In fact, I have contributed some kind of a donation to a person who is trying to revive livelihoods of school teachers in private schools, thousands of them in Hyderabad, because they lost everything. They were working for 5,000, 7,000 per month. I mean, these are all part of MSMEs. I mean, if you can see that the worst things, you may have to perhaps, there is, I think, one of the major problems is these things can only be captured with that of micro studies. I don't know whether any survey, I mean, Mangai has worked with urban industrial data. I don't know whether you can get any detailed information on the nature of MSCs. And then I think Banu's question about, let's say, the local level. In fact, this is exactly where the states matter. In fact, if there were to be resources and the kind of, let's say, autonomy that states had, they would have managed the crisis much better. In fact, they have best delivery systems. For instance, PDS, you don't have to announce from Delhi as to how food should be distributed, food grains. We have one of the best in Andhra Pradesh. There is no, I mean, they didn't care to take your so-called money or grain given to people. They don't need it. They have a wonderful working system. And then when it comes to the question of pensions, the Andhra Pradesh state gives, I mean, Telangana and Andhra Pradesh also gives 2,500 to 3,000 rupees as pension. You are giving only 1,500. They administer, in fact, saturation. The policy program at state level is saturation. Nobody should go, if you're old, without pension. Now, this is possible, that local autonomy and resources are important, but you are starving them of resources. You have taken away their power to tax, and you are not giving them anything. And of course, certainly not the act of God that would perhaps, and the rural, bonus rural low-hanging fruit. It's very attractive. But our problem is, this is as political economy problem is, we have been talking about agriculture. There is no question of any lag in production, but every unit of agriculture production every year experiences increasing amount of investment per rupee of value added. The share of the farmer is contracting, and the risks involved is very high. In fact, you know, the insurance of the Prime Minister's insurance with a big, most of the states are rejecting it. Some of the states would like to have their own insurance because the premium that they collected, it is, I think, to the benefit of companies. And therefore, I think one of the pioneering things that's happening, one should watch, is that of AP has started its own insurance company. And I hope it succeeds. Because, you know, you give subsidy, somebody carries away. If there is a benefit, let it be there in the state corporation. That perhaps is the direction. But what the government is doing, I think Banu may have to closely watch. We have fears. All these three ordinances in terms of liberalizing agricultural produce market is essentially, I would use this expression, is essentially a Banya program. You're going to put more power into the hands of black marketers, and then let's say those who really still a private, enormous control in spite of the regulated markets, they call the shots. And if you are going to give them over 10 years in the name of infrastructure, cold storage loans, because it's agriculture, and go down loans, they are going to capture most of the things. And if you're not going to give, they have resources. They will have their own go downs to store. And if you remove your essential commodities act from the jurisdiction, we don't know what happens. I think we are all afraid. We wish, this is exactly, I refer to many of them are celebrating 1991 moment in agriculture, because agriculture escaped this deregulation. Now they are deregulated. And this is going to be a dangerous kind of a way of looking at it. I'm careful, but in fact, in that Jana Lok Sabha, their major concern was this. Okay. I think I stop here and wait for, he's saying that there are some more questions.
Yes, sir. Dr. Ravindra has come back, then Professor Gayatri.
Anyway, it will be a pleasure to hear from Ravindra.
This is the second set of questions that I am inviting. Dr. Ravindra has come online now, please.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hello?
Yeah, we are getting.
Yeah. Sorry, I quite some time and I was not able to hear even the latter part of Professor Reddy's speech and even all the other responses. But this late hour, I just have one or two observations. Of course, I mean, Professor Narasimha Reddy's exhaustive critique of the economy and almost referring to the total failure of the present government and all that, very passionately delivered, I must say. There's no doubt, I mean, the decline in the economy, in the growth rate, decline in employment and all that. On the question of poverty, I saw a recent report, not seen the full report, but a reference to that by Dr. Surjit Balla and one or two others. I think it's a committee set up. According to that report, the poverty rate has come down to less than 10%, some 8.3% also of the population. You see, if there has been such a deep decline in poverty rates, it somewhat contradicts the rest of the story that you narrated, that the economy has declined so badly, and especially the poor, the vulnerable, etc., have been very badly affected. I don't know whether there is some kind of a contradiction there, or the figures can be questioned by economists. I don't have much to say on that, but maybe you can throw some light on that. I mean, if it is poverty has declined to less than 10, say 8%, that is number one. And secondly, especially post-COVID, I think we need to also take into account the global scenario. I think now almost all countries have been affected, except China and Vietnam, which have shown a positive growth rate. All other countries, including the US, Western economies, etc., they have all shown minus growth only. Maybe first quarter in India is certainly pretty bad. So how would you view this in a global scenario, India's situation now? Because it is not peculiar to India. Even earlier, pre-COVID also, growth rates were declining across the world, I mean, in many countries. So this is another question that I would like to pose. And finally, according to you now in the present predicament, and maybe in the next 1 year at least, it's going to be very tough, 1 or 2 years, what should be the priorities of the government, given the fact that revenues themselves have dwindled a lot? It is one thing to say government has not invested here, there, or even to take the latest example of the GST share not being given to the state government. State government's been asked to borrow separately. And secondly, and very importantly, we are facing the problem with China, the defense borders. So that means public investment in defense has to go up considerably. Unless we do that, then it will be very difficult to take on China, let alone take on China. You want to meet a minimum situation, you need to strengthen that. So how do you define the priorities in terms of investment so far as government is concerned? Should it be more on generating employment, on defense, on generating demand, as you said? I mean, these are my observations. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Now I invite Professor Gayatri. No, please unmute.
Yeah, I've done it. Yeah. Sir, I would definitely wonderful kind of a coverage of all the issues right from 1991 and before also. And again, in particular, a very good assessment of the public financial issues which are bothering the country right now. I think you've really mentioned all of them, including the one that the government expenditure actually has come down from 15 to 12% as such. And I just wanted to add one more point to that a more serious issue is one of where the capital expenditure share has really come down in a significant manner from 16 to 12%. While I really do not have any kind of major issues or major questions to raise, one particular issue that I'm very happy about is your view that fiscal rules should not become a constraint on the government now to enhance the investments or the expenditure. We totally agree with your point of view on that. And we've also taken a stand that having a standard 3% as a fiscal deficit is one issue which has to be considered. And our own research has shown very well that the government investment where it is required in some of the sectors is totally inadequate, especially the infrastructure sectors, like, so I think given all this, I think on the fiscal deficit, we really do not have any issue, even if it is increased. One minor issue that I wanted your response to is, how do we really tackle these credit rating agencies which are just waiting to sort of downgrade the government's performance, which will affect the borrowings of the government? And of course, one issue that I wanted to raise has just been raised by Dr. Ravindra. What should the government's priorities be in view of the revenue, which has drastically come down in view of the COVID situation? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Gayatri. I move on to Professor Devendra Babu. Yeah, unmute.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Madheshwaran. I have two small observations to make here. One is Professor Reddy has brought out the historical, in the sense from demonetization period, how it affected the economy. Here I would like to add that I think it started from the dismantling of the planning commission itself. So there is no planning at the country level from bottom to top level. I think indirectly this is also affecting the economy in a big way. That is one observation. Second observation, in the developmental role, in the developmental aspects, states and local governments have a major role to play. Of course, local governments, they are only nominal institutions, but states have a major role in developmental aspects, and keeping the heterogeneity of regional variations. I think central government failed to take into confidence the states, and this also affected in a big way for the downsliding of the economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Devendra Babu. This batch, the last question is from Professor Kalasridhar.
Thank you very much, Professor Madheshwaran. And first of all, I wanted to really thank Professor Narsim Reddy for his fascinating lecture on this very special day to all of us taking his time off. So I really enjoyed this very thought-provoking lecture. And he looked back quite a bit, and it is said that even the lion of the forest looks back for any challenges. So I really appreciated his review of the journey from the license Raj to the billionaire Raj, as he called it very rightly. I mean, there is no major question I want to ask after all these series of expert questions and comments. One quick observation, which is quite similar to the points that Professor Gayatri made and Professor Banumurthy also made earlier, which is that I wanted to ask this question of what happens to our urban employment guarantee program, given cities really are the worst hit because of the pandemic. And you did also answer my question indirectly, saying that fiscal stress should not be an issue because the other countries have done it. We also have to do it. Now, what do you see is the role of the central government vis-a-vis the state government in this? Because the government of Karnataka, as you probably know, was due to get about 18,289 crores or something as GST compensation from the state, and I think the state is going to get less than half of it. And now the central government has happily shifted the burden to the state government, saying that you can go ahead and borrow this. So what do you think? I mean, given the extent of devolution, our local governments, although they are playing a very big functional role in the pandemic, they are really poor things. They cannot really do much. They don't have physical resources. They don't have any financial funds to really carry on. So what do you think is the role, relative role of the central government vis-a-vis the state government? Thanks a lot, and wish everybody who is present here a very, very happy and respectful Teachers' Day. Thanks.
Thank you very much, sir. Over to you. And there are a couple of questions. I'll just read out this couple of questions from the chat box, so that only two questions. Sir, the first question is that how to revive the unorganized sector, which is affected structurally, pushed by the COVID-19 crisis. And second question is, little is known about the amount of contribution to the PM Care Fund. In this context, the question emerges regarding how the amount is going to be utilized with regard to the COVID-19 pandemic. What is the modus operandi of utilization of the fund? And the other question is that from my colleague Sunil Nautiyal, he just put his own field level observation, but since he is here, wanted to ask that question because I could not comprehend the right. Why don't you ask? Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, dear director, for inviting me. And I think truly privileged I am today to be the part of this excellent lecture. Thank you so very much for your thought-provoking lecture. I am not an economist. Your lecture gave me many ideas that how to inject a kind of component of the economics into our research in the field level. I am very sensitive to the economics. All my papers contains socioeconomic parts of the large socio-ecological setup. And my question with regard to the lecture you have delivered today, my team is in the field at present. They are working in 10 or 11 agroecological regions of our country, collecting the data, understanding how socio-ecological system is functioning post-COVID. Lots of people already went back to their native places. Many of them moved back after 20 or 30 years. This has created a kind of impact on entire functioning of the socio-ecological system. Not much attention is given to revive or resolve such issues. So how at local level such issues could be solved, and what kind of interventions could be made so that our economy at local level can also be revived and could help in building the local socioeconomic structure in sustained manner. Definitely this will have the large implications on the regional level or state level. Thank you so very much, sir, for delivering such a wonderful lecture. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sunil sir. I have exhausted all the questions, and over to you, sir.
You want me to get myself exhausted?
No. 1 hour 45 minutes. Amidst of this, my chair is swinging. You are noticing that also.
I try to be very brief. Yeah, I think Ravindra's lecture. In fact, toward the end, I think you were not there. I referred to the phenomenon. It's global. I mean, it's all known now. Most of the countries are affected, and I also ended my lecture by quoting the economist summing up what the other countries are doing. Essentially, they're all addressing the problem by addressing the bottom of the society, which is the working class, who are vulnerable, whose jobs
I missed your latter part. Sorry.
That's, I think, you're not able to hear, or what? Ravindra?
No. In fact, as I said, I missed all your latter part, your ending and all that, because I lost the connection. So I'm sorry. Okay, please go ahead.
We do have information, and in fact, I also, the mentioning of this global phenomenon also is helpful to see how others are handling it. It's in this context we say that without exception, most of the countries which have their own programs of intervention have an intervention to stimulate demand. Particularly, they are addressing those who have lost jobs, those who have missed occupations as the target of, let's say, infusement, whether it is paying wages by the government for those who have lost their work, or let's say by trying to give unemployment compensation. I mean, the extreme example is the United States. 34 millions get, let's say, substantial kind of support by way of unemployment elements. And when it comes to the question of the revenues and priorities and China. And where do we get revenues? I mean, this pushes me into, in fact, I take a hint. If we have a situation war-like, this is what I was mentioning, you have to face it like war. How did countries come out of war? In fact, the kind of ravages that countries suffer. And then I don't know whether we should be, in fact, the latest news is that I don't know what the government of India is spending on defense, but I don't know, I know what government of India is spending on defense through China. There is an article by the Chinese foreign ministry person who says that India is spending $71 billion a year on budget. It is the third largest defense spender in the world. Of course, he didn't mention, I imagine China is the second largest after US. We are the big spenders, which is of course in India 2.5% of GDP, this 71.1 billions comes in. So if we have to, supposing, I mean, the whole thing is hypothetical. Supposing China-India war starts, how do you face it? I mean, how countries face a war? Do they sit on the FRBM or some kind of a constraint? Countries go to war by, let's say, pumping in their resources various ways. We are also under a crisis. This is what I was trying to say, that I think Gayatri was picking up on fiscal dimensions, is the FRBM. I'm also saying don't get constrained by FRBM, go a bit further. I'm also saying take it as a challenge, and there are ways of, let's say, monetizing temporarily. It's not, I think, all that we are asking for 6 months, pump in more money. You could perhaps monetize through that of government securities. It's not eternal. If there's a war, you are going to do it for a longer period. These are the challenges. And the next, I think you have also referred to revenues. That's what I was harping. The responses are, at a time when you need more resources, you reduce corporate income tax. You keep on giving, let's say, lakhs of crores of tax concessions. How does it go? I mean, it's a time that you have to mobilize. People are saying, I have built up a case for, I didn't say that, wealth tax, or even you talk of estate duty. These are the times, those who have huge money have to pay. Otherwise, where are the resources? If you keep on referring to that of resource constraint, if you keep on reducing taxes, you will have constraint. It is good, of course, to say seamless, painless tax system. But for whom is going to be seamless, painless? For those who have to pay, it should be painful to pay. It is a tax obligation. Well, I mean, this, I think, you would appreciate, I'm talking in my own line of a little bit of, as he was telling, political economy. And Gayatri was asking about credit rating agencies. I am the last person to understand this credit rating. It's all part of this game of the corporate sector. They would perhaps manipulate or do. But only thing is, they are huge. One of the interesting things is, this is what Abhijit Banerjee was saying, that there is a misnomer. Most of the people who are called economists are the ones who work for these agencies. They give you rates, they give you a kind of, let's say, estimates of growth even before, of course, CSO gives in. But I don't know, because they have their own, perhaps, place in this corporate world. And in fact, you can add to that question, how do you explain in this crisis, stock markets booming? I don't know. And these are all the magics that they play with us. And then I think the economists must bother about real people and real economy. Let them play the games as long as they are permitted. Because now the government giving exemption from paying cess on the foreign private investors capital gains tax. What does it mean? You are incentivizing them to come and invest, as if that is going to solve our problem. Of course, in the present juncture, they will come here because they don't have investment opportunities there. They have very low interest. But of course, they will also pull away suddenly. There would be huge crisis and the country would suffer. I think it's only, I can only go on rambling like this. Of course, Devendra Babu's history of abolition of planning commission also tells a lot about it. It's a part of the process of shift to that of neoliberal regime. Only thing is from mild to that of more strong. That's what I was trying to say. And then when you, whatever residue that remained not privatized, like coal to that of atomic energy, we are doing it. So we start with abolishing planning commission. Why a remnant of regulation planning? It's very, very inconvenient. PMO office does everything. What is this planning? You ask people in Niti Ayog whether they have, anyone has anything to do without, let's say, PMO office. It's all, that is exactly, it leads me to that of the second part of the question. What about the states? This is exactly the process. The power is getting concentrated center. Within the center, lots of very reputable political scientists, they're also having webinars I attend because I want to understand politics. They're all saying that there is nothing like simple centralization. Within the center, it is PMO centralization. None of them can raise their voice. So if you treat states the way in which you are treating, take their resource raising capacities away, and then start dictating terms, and then of course blame God occasionally, then what happens? And I think one small thing that he maybe casually mentioned, Devendra Babu, that local governments are only nominal. No, I think Kannan has left. Local governments are very important. In fact, in this kind of a crisis, but the question that Sunil is raising, that they're all there back, and how do you face this? Is the local government's effectiveness? The Kerala can face it if you put resources in panchayats, and then they can certainly handle this. And therefore, a time when we thought local governments are nominal is passé, and we have to empower them really, not, let's say, merely by changing laws. So I thank everyone for their patience. I have talked too much. I should not have talked. Instead of 45 minutes, I talked more. I am very grateful to all of you. I just know.
Sir, it's a mind-blowing. You had given 1 hour 45 minutes lecture, which no one felt that it's boring, and in fact, it has given a value addition to the existing stock of knowledge. That is what a teacher normally do. And also, you have identified in the 70, 80 students in the class, whoever is not understanding, whoever is doing some this thing, even my chair swinging also, you are sitting in the webinar, you are observing. That is the teacher quality. So I'm just in a very jovial part, I'm saying that's the real teacher that you had given a very wonderful lecture, and also more than 1 hour 45 minutes lecture for the past 1 hour. You have been reflecting on the various questions which had come from the dignitaries and the other professors and my colleagues, and it's highly enriched. And on behalf of the ISEC fraternity, sir, and thanks for accepting to deliver this lecture, especially to commemorate Teachers' Day. And of course, we are very lucky enough that you have accepted on this day. And it's a great privilege for the ISEC, sir, that this is a great memory for us. And And of course, these are all the issues which you have raised. Of course, it can be converted as a paper from the point of view of macroeconomy, from the point of view of the Indian economic thought, from the point of view of even from the public finance side, and in the various areas in which you have touched upon. Of course, it's a great input for many of our young colleagues to really think over and to convert them as a serious critical the research papers, and we have largely benefited, sir. I hand over the mic to our beloved chairperson of ISAC, Professor Thorat.
No, you should end it now. I have nothing to say. I think it's such a insightful lecture. It bring out new aspect, as you say rightly, and we got to know many aspects of it. Yes, you can request him for a full-length paper for the journal of the ISAC.
Yes, sir. That is a good proposal.
Yeah.
Of course, I want you to give and convert this lecture. I want to convert this lecture as a monograph, or I want to put it in journal of.
All of them, I think, are very important.
Yeah.
It's a good idea. Good idea.
It's a good idea.
All of them. You have the recording of this lecture, so
I have the recording of the lecture.
So you can send them back and keep them busy, Kanan and others.
I'm going to send them
to revise. Yeah.
I'm going to send them. I'm going to send them the recording also.
Okay. I will repeat the suggestion made by Narasimha Reddy to Rajendra Mamgin to prepare those tables and update them and send to us and share with us. Yes, Rajendra Mamgin, you listen to us? No, he's mounted.
Yes, sir. I'm listening.
Okay. So we look forward to those tables. Very important.
Let me see. I'm trying to get those tables. Let me see.
Yeah.
So Mamgin cannot.
Indian story is not a macro story. Indian story is a micro story. It's aggregated story that we should bring out. Narasimha Reddy, really thank you very much. I think.
Thank you, Professor Thorat. Thank you. Madheswaran. Thank you, Ravindra Garu, for sitting through. Thank you, Mamgai. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Kanan, and thank you, Ravindran.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, Madheswaran, we close now.
Yeah, we will close, sir.
Please go ahead.
But a wonderful idea you had given that we will convert them as a paper.
I'll try to attempt.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. How are you? You look much better now, Kanan.
Yes, I'm much.
Some tonic. Give me something. Some tonic.
Hey, sir, Vilwadi Kuligai from Kottagalari Vaidisala.
Okay. I think I must go there. But it's in drowning now. It's raining heavily.
That is called Vilwadi Kuligai.
No. My medicine is looking at people like Narasimha Reddy, and then I get charged.
Okay, then I'll also do that. Look at you and get some inspiration.
Thorat and Mamgain and so many other beautiful faces like Kala and all that. Then I get charged.
Not Madheswaran, not really.
Madheswaran is threatening face. Okay, thank you. Bye.
Okay, bye.
Thank you, bye.
Bye. Take care.